The final illusion to surrender cuts so deep that once you get to this point of needing to decide within yourself if you're ready to go all in, you realize there's literally no going back. It's the point of confronting the deepest split which caused you to even feel you have to make this choice in every moment. It's facing multiple parts of you with multiple worldviews and perspectives, one of which holds a certain fear-based mentality and wants you to defend, suppress, conceal truths because it doesn't want you to be fully submerged in the feeling state. And the other part, of course, knows this isn't even a choice. It's the part that always feels, always sees, and fully contacts the truth of reality because that is the role of the emotional body. And there's actually no way to be existent in this time-space matrix and not have that part of you alive. That's the part that connects all of us humans with a higher source of sentience. It's the source of consciousness and presence that really allows us to witness the unfolding of life through ourselves. And yet most people face this essential blind spot, and it raises the question, do we actually want to know and feel and fully be that source of consciousness? Or do we want to represent a version of consciousness that's able to shapeshift, sometimes feel fully and sometimes not, represent the truths that are convenient and that we want to believe in, but not have full access to that higher dimensional perspective because what that would require from us is literally yielding to the reality of what is. And of course, the reality of what is often a little bit too much for people to handle, as it puts you in a state where you cannot oppose what you're experiencing, including the elements that you might not want to believe in, what is really painful to see, and what causes you to become permeable to the field, as opposed to numb because of it. And so this is what causes a trauma mechanism, which a lot of people think is actually a belief that they're choosing. And that is this worldview, that ignorance is bliss. When in reality, ignorance is simply a kind of anesthesia that connects you back to the state in which you started to feel you have a choice of adaptation, which bears no consequence, like the choice of choosing to numb emotions when you don't want to feel the deeper reality at hand, which is truly the fear of a child within the self that doesn't want to have full access to emotions when pain arises. But before we really understand the reality of that little child that might still be living within you, we need to look big picture and really come to terms with the nature of our consciousness and why we're here having this very complex multidimensional experience in a finite time-space matrix. In this playing field of reality, with so many different choices and timelines and possibilities that can be collapsed at any given moment, the most obvious choice for a lot of people is to keep things separate. And what I mean by that is when you're feeling a lot of complexities and you're sensing that there are a lot of opportunities for you to express different parts of yourself and to make different choices, you may not want to actually decide on what is the choice that brings most alignment. And so naturally that creates splits within the self that harbor different emotions and allow you to have more freedoms like desires, multiple opinions at the same time, and expressions which could come across as manipulative tendencies, coping mechanisms, masks, and other ways of being that allow you to maintain this multiplicity of your being. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it does raise the question, which of these parts are actually real, and which are rooted in avoidance, escapism, denial, rejection, or flat-out lies that prevent you from fully feeling and being submerged in the reality that you experience most deeply within yourself. If you start to feel into the scaffolding of your being and sense where do those choices actually come from, what causes you to have these desires that end up being projected as different tendencies in yourself, even different manners of your personality, the way that you show up differently in different situations, what actually compels you to be acting out differently in these different folds of your physical experience. And if that's the case, then why is that? At the deepest level of your being, you may sense that there is a certain danger that you feel when it comes to holding all of these truths and creating an environment of oneness. And you might be quick to blame other people for creating this experience, or sense that maybe it's even unsafe to operate in a mode of unity consciousness, because that would cause you to collapse certain possibilities, certain relationships, and to confront things that you haven't been confronting for a long time. But alas, that's exactly what allows you to achieve unification of perception and to stop living the lie that might cause you to create all this unwanted confusion in your life. Because here's the thing, whatever is not integrated at the level of that deepest subconscious part of yourself will start to rule your life through the shadows. And this is why ignorance is actually the worst kind of bliss. It's a dissociation of a bliss state. It feels like bliss because if you don't want to face deeper parts of your inner experience, then that bliss of dissociation buys you time and the opportunity to procrastinate by creating many more seemingly beneficial choices that are really distancing you from what you've been feeling all along. But look at it that way. Whatever you think creates a blissful state of dissociation is actually numbing you further. It's creating more illusions that compress you into an egoic body that's living in an even deeper state of amnesia. Does that remind you of anything? Think about all of us when we enter this reality. What kind of a state we're in? Aside from that innocent, curious, open-minded, and super sponge-like connection that we have within ourselves to reality, we also are in this kind of a fog that we need to come out of, because when we enter this world through the portal of our mother, we are automatically in a space of spiritual amnesia. We start relearning ourselves and need to spend a great deal of time accessing through different dynamics and perspectives and feelings and visceral experiences what it is to really have an identity. Essentially what it feels like to re-access our soul field, and that comes initially by just exploring the newness of our experience. That's us coming out of a state of amnesia by starting to orient ourselves with reality in an authentic way. And before trauma unfolds, that's always going to be an experience that brings moments of bliss, moments of curiosity, expansion. Feeling ourselves merging with the physical plane is a super blissful experience if, of course, we are given the opportunity to also feel safe and held and respected as we're having that blissful encounter with reality. But what if that doesn't happen? So let's say we're looking into the worldview of a little child that is trying to experience this blissful merging with reality through their authentic self, but they feel pressured in that process, where they start to encounter challenges, blocks, rejection, or space from those that actually would best support them in this experience of freedom, which causes them to sense the need to contract. When that happens, their natural bliss state is interfered with, and instead of experiencing expansion, support, and the feeling of love, something in them starts to break from that blissful state, and all of a sudden they're polarized in the direction of fear. Their authentic perception is met by a different perception of reality that screams of danger, rejection, avoidance, and something that tells them maybe they need to shift gears and either shut down that creative, curious, bliss-like tendency and move into a different state of operating, which allows them to be more defensive of their authentic ways, or simply to shut down that desire to expand or evolve because they don't feel they have the safety to do that. And sooner or later, on the timeline of your experience, as you went from that caterpillar phase of your earliest development to the chrysalis of maturation and individuation, you went through an experience of needing to change your relationship to your authentic bliss state of exploration, When pain first erupted in your field, you might have approached it as something that you had no way to integrate or process, especially if you felt that you weren't held in a safe emotional environment. And that can really cause somebody subconsciously to start shying away from their own emotional state. Deep down, that is the seed or the precursor to this notion that ignorance is bliss. The actual reality unfolding in that moment is that looking past or avoiding the painful feeling is the only way for the being to continue to exist. And of course, humans have a myriad of ways in which they learn to cope with pain and unwanted experiences. Everything from avoidance strategies like procrastination, lying, gaslighting, simply escaping things, even daydreaming and dissociating in a spiritual way, or the more extremes like drug use, substance abuse, alcohol, binge eating, doing anything that allows you to stuff your physical, emotional body with any kind of numbing agent that allows you to experience this illusion of ignorance is bliss. That blissful state is essentially the attempt to come back to square one, to nullify the trauma, to reduce the pain, and to become so emotionally blank that you don't have to associate with what's actually real inside you. With a primary emotional tactic that's rooted in avoidance, rejection, or denial of any sort, the way that you're going to be operating in reality at large is going to be with that same shield intact. Because you can't hold any kind of distancing from your own truth and also want to access the deeper truth of reality at the same time. And so immediately, the connection to the mystery of life starts to be drowned out, and more ways are searched for to pacify deeper truths about the world as you know it, because you simply don't want to face it. The connection between your inner world and your outer reality being obscured is what ends up manifesting. If you don't seek to know the deepest parts of you, why would you possibly want to understand reality at the deepest level? This is why we have so many different philosophies, ideologies, and ideas, as well as conspiracy theories and conceptions about why we're here, what is the best belief system, and the best way to live our lives, because these infinite variations of human traumas, emotional complexes, and adaptations to the deepest essence of our being has caused this complexity of adaptation to life. And so if you aren't sure how to actually feel yourself and hold space for your emotions and your genuine energy, then of course it's going to feel super complex to try to understand life and the ultimate way to thrive, to relate to reality, to connect to God, and simply feel at peace in this world. Because that outsourcing, looking out there, trying to externalize whatever it is that you're still looking for, is really you looking for that part of you that has been neglected, because you unconsciously chose the ignorance is bliss model that has trapped you in this perpetual confusion. But don't worry, there's a way out. There's always a way out, as long as you want to actually break through this myth that ignorance is bliss, and that this is the solution to a world so full of pain and trauma and endless adaptation instead of transmutation, which actually is the key to coming out of this kind of amnesia state. Let's go back to the frontier of that inner child that has initially accessed the state of amnesia, but that initially was coping with it just fine. I mean, think about it. You as a child, you had every part of you aligned with the capacity to be free, joyous, spontaneously open and experimentative, which allowed you to experience so much that your neurons were loaded with information that caused you to develop so quickly. However, once you start to numb yourself or to package a worldview that feels complete, there's no more curiosity, and ignorance feels like bliss because you stop wanting to see a bigger truth. The only way out of that is by starting to challenge what you know, and to really get curious about everything that you think you know that you don't actually have a clue about. And that makes you extremely humble and starts breaking apart this illusion of completeness. which initially can be terrifying but ultimately becomes extremely stimulating. It can actually cause you to develop new expressions of your personality, to feel a blossoming of your essence, because as soon as you let in that thought that there's more to reality that you haven't been letting yourself experience, then you allow yourself to experience this whirlwind of emotions and clarity within yourself. You're no longer looking for anything outside you, but you're accessing parts of you that needed to be understood and alchemized into the deeper wisdom that likewise connects you with more of reality. As you look for the inner clarity and you develop coherence from there, you start to feel what is coherent in the matrix all around you. You can start to more easily sense who is actually living their life in alignment with the Ignorance is Bliss manifesto and who isn't. That's an answer that's going to be impossible for you to develop at the level of your mind, but it will actually become super apparent who is living in either trajectory based on what you feel coming from the underlying intention of their existence. Not just what they're expressing, but how they're expressing, how deeply they're willing to question themselves, and if they're actually aligned with authentic connection, as opposed to just success or experiences at the level of the persona. This is not something to judge, by the way. Every one of us has a choice, and we have the free will to choose to navigate reality based on our own level of consciousness. If you desire to actually connect with your own soul template at the deepest, most authentic level, then you're not going to even feel like you have a choice at this point. Ignorance is bliss dies the moment you become committed to reality of true expansion, because that's the only way to experience love in this realm. Love is when you become indivisible from those deeper feelings, from all the parts of you, and from the truths that you know you can't run away from. As soon as you harbor that distinction within you, or you simply don't want to understand the meaning behind things in the way that they have presented in your life, then you also cut off your capacity to experience love. And although this may seem paradoxical, because love might feel like the opposite of what you once experienced, or the opposite of some philosophies or ideas that you have been exposed to, the key is not in believing all the things that you've ever felt. The most important piece here is being open to understanding where they all come from. And from that point, allowing there to be this golden cord of awareness that illuminates what are the truths accessible in everyone and in everything. And then when you feel that there's blind spots or some elements that are half-truths and partial perceptions, you let your awareness slice through those elements and be reconfigured in a field that holds even greater stability, because you didn't automatically reject these partial elements. You simply understand where they come from, and from there, you can create an even more cohesive way of experiencing reality and yourself. Ignorance feeds the ego's desire for control and allows you to experience this state of severance, which feels like a convenient option. Meanwhile, you are going to know deep down that you are preventing yourself from accessing certain awareness that actually connects you with the real point of existence. It brings you right back to square one, to that point of your own initiation along this life path, when you felt that there was a pure, more open, more streamlined way of being yourself, where there is alignment between your somatic intelligence, your emotional, mental intelligence, and ultimately spiritual intelligence that connects all of these dots for you. Whenever you felt that something severed you from your own sense of self, from your own deepest capacity to feel and to really be, that's a part of what establishes this mode of ignorance is bliss. It might actually create in you a sense of cognitive dissonance, because maybe you've been programmed with certain beliefs that you know deep down are invalid, and you're afraid of combating them by representing what your own body knows better about. Remember, your body is literally an instrument commanding you from the field of consciousness to experience resonance through the language of the anima. That's your soul speaking through feelings, sensations, and unorthodox truths that allow you to feel what it is that is true, not at the level of the mind, but through a deeper heart-based capacity. And so that right now is the choice. It's important to note that every single one of us has the wisdom of the anima, or that divine feminine intelligence that lives within us, and that is the language of our soul. It communes with the soma, or the body, the feminine state of physical essence, in order to communicate these truths that the brain can't easily comprehend, and yet they live within us. They come through as visceral sensations, and they also allow us to bridge perceptions and awareness that can feel really complex to handle, but ultimately, some will create a feeling of resonance. And you will always know if you are allowing yourself to be coherent, connecting dots fully, supporting an experience that is truthful, versus if you are dodging bullets of awareness and trying to stay in this compressed egoic identity, because that is what ultimately creates the ignorance is bliss reality. The bliss for the ego is what supports the illusion that the soul is never going to buy. And a part of you that feels that resonance is going to know. Where it becomes especially perplexing is trying to understand why you have been betraying your soul's wisdom and desire for expansion in the physical realm by supporting an illusion. It feels like a very uncomfortable comfort zone from that perspective, because you can easily see you are testing yourself on your capacity to unite, to pursue something beyond material creature comforts and simple dissociative strategies, but actually feel transformed by the emotions that you're presented with, to learn from experiences, to search for the deeper lesson, instead of just trying to eliminate that deeper realization. Wherever you are now feeling like you're trying to avoid a certain truth, a certain experience, a certain person, something that is haunting you, is exactly where this revelation begins. That point of discomfort is revealing a trigger that needs to be understood. And that's also how the anima communicates. This is the deeper psycho-spiritual synchronicity that a lot of people are trying to not look for. It's a lot more convenient to look for synchronicities as repeating numbers on the clock or signs that you get that support what you want to be looking for. But imagine your next task is to actually search for the synchronicities in the persistent points of pain and discomfort that keep coming up. Because that too is a synchronicity. It's your anima speaking in an even more intelligent way, showing you what actually needs to be understood and transformed. Otherwise, it will continue to rule your world from the shadows. And what is a shadow other than an element supporting the inner child's reality of safety? If you go deeper into the reality of what brought you safety when you were very little, you're going to feel where something was initially avoided because you just couldn't sit with that truth long enough, and you had to find a way to program yourself out of that experience. And that's usually where that ignorance is developed. It's not any kind of malicious intention. It's actually rooted from the most innocent way of trying to create safety within yourself. The challenge now is, once you've seen where that desire for safety has taken you, once you've analyzed all the timelines that have erupted from that moment of you actually choosing to shut things down or to project in more narcissistic ways, or instead to cope with your shame or guilt or fear or grief by creating a way of shielding yourself from the reality of love your heart actually desires, you can now analyze, was that actually the best choice? Or was that the best choice that you could have made back then, that you now see was a traumatic way of you processing pain? And now you can undo that by retrocausally seeing the big picture and guiding yourself back to that deepest vulnerability. You can assess what you would have done different and mend the gap between the part of you that chose ignorance as a way of bliss and the part of you that knows bliss is really a state of remembrance and coming home to the point why you felt what you felt, but also where you needed to access a deeper awakening of perhaps why you came here, to meet those people, to gather those experiences, to string them along on a trajectory of you actually connecting to your deepest self, and from there, igniting your passions, your purpose, and a way of understanding. The light in your heart never needs to be dimmed. If you make it an effort to demolish this notion that ignorance is bliss by looking for all the ways in which you're still supporting this idea, with empathy, with compassion, by actually trying to understand the fear beneath the illusion, what it is that you have been trying so hard to avoid because you've been afraid of going there, and now nudging yourself in the right direction by holding that paradox within yourself, then you're going to feel like the ice begins to melt. And a part of you smiles in remembrance, because you remember that that was the point all along, to feel deeper, to think in alignment with that knowing, and to synchronize with the path of divine intelligence that has been shining a light in the direction of this realization all along.